What would happen if Barry Lukaitis walked through the doors of our church? Barry Lukaitis. Some of you know that name like that. Others of you are like, that name sounds familiar. Paul, where are you pulling that out of? And some of you may not know who he is. But you may know the news reports from 1996. Barry Lukaitis went into Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington, and shot 2 of his classmates and 1 of his teachers. 3 of his classmates, 2 died. 1 was injured, and the teacher passed away as well. I wonder what would happen if Barry Lukaitis walked through the doors of our church. It's not that he could, he's in jail for the rest of his life. But I've been thinking about that question this morning for a few different reasons. But before we get there, I just want to share with you a story. So this week I am emotional already. I don't know why, but I am. It's been an emotional week for me. For a lot of reasons. Golly, I was not expecting this. I have no reason to be emotional right now. I went on a retreat this week with 4 other pastors, and we just got away, and it was really good. Obviously, it was really good, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know what I'm showing right now, but it doesn't matter. But it was just meant for us to be able to get away and be refreshed and encouraged and all these things that pastor retreats are supposed to do, and it did that. It was wonderful. It was a great time. What I learned, though, that the guy that was leading this retreat, he served in ministry for a long time and now has this ministry called Refresh Souls, which is 2 pastors to help refresh their souls. And what I learned from him was that he lived in Moses Lake in 1996 when this event went down. In fact, he started a ministry called Youth Dynamics. And the first week that he started this ministry was the same week that this event happened, that Barry Lukaitis did this at Frontier Middle School. And so he was on the scene the day that it happened. And as the day progressed, he really felt like he needed or wanted to talk with Barry himself. And so he was meeting with the chief of police at the time and expressed this idea to him, not knowing if it would get anywhere or not, and kind of left it at that. Well, at 6 a.m. the next morning, he got a phone call, and it was from Barry Lukaitis' mom. And she asked him, "Why do you want to meet with my son?" And so he kind of shared his heart and what he was thinking about the whole thing. And she said, "Okay, thank you very much." Or no, I'm sorry, I'm getting the story mixed up. But anyways, it ended up being, she was like, "Okay, I'll meet you in 15 minutes at," I think it was the McDonald's there in Moses Lake, 6 o'clock in the morning. So he's like, okay. So he gets there and meets with her, and they talk through it all, and he ends up being able to get access to the jail in Ephrata, and he starts meeting with Barry on a weekly basis. And he does this for 3 years, meets with him. Over the course of that time, they talked about a lot of different things and processed through, the reasons why Barry did this and what was going on in his mind, the deception, all the different things that were happening and taking place in these moments. And in a moment, Barry surrendered his life to Jesus. Now, whether or not you believe his heart and where he's at is, well, it's not the point, but it is the point. And I'll get to that in a minute because I want to tell you the rest of this part of the rest of the story. Because in 2012, so he was sentenced as an adult to life in prison without parole. Well, 1996, fast forward to 2012, the Supreme Court made a ruling that no minor could be charged as an adult. And so it took 5 years. So in 2017, it came around, and Barry had to be resentenced. And so he went before the same judge that had sentenced him to life without parole, who came out of retirement just to do this one case. Mark, the guy that I have been with the whole week, the guy that met with Barry for 3 years until he was transferred to a different prison, was at this trial in 2017. And it was during this time that Barry could appeal and could possibly be out of jail by the age of 52. And he was in his late 30s at this point. And over the course, obviously there was a lot of different testimonies going on. It was a very emotional case, and things were going on. He actually wrote a handwritten letter apologizing for what he did, not trying to explain anything away. In fact, saying that not only apologized for what he did, but apologizing for trying to escape justice at the time because he pled insanity and he knew he wasn't insane. He was just trying to get a different sentence. And he had the opportunity to appeal. He was then given 182 years in prison. And he had the opportunity to appeal, but he denied that opportunity because of the effect that he believed it would have on the families if he were to ever get out of prison. Now, I say all of these things not to try to put him into a better light or to, by any means, excuse anything that he did. I say all of these things because his response is a fascinating response, because it's such an emotional case, and because some of us in this room were even affected by, or knew people that were affected by what happened almost 30 years ago. It's very emotional. And hearing him say that he's given his life to Jesus, hearing him say that he's sorry, hearing him say these different things, I'm thinking for those that, especially those that were victimized by his crimes, have to wonder how genuine he really was or is in saying these things. And rightfully so. But we'll never know. We don't know his heart. We don't know where he's at. But this is the point. The reason why I asked the question, what would happen if Barry Lukitis walked through the doors of our church, is because as we're going to Luke chapter 7 this morning, I really believe that the people that were faced in this situation and saw what happened take place with this, who all we know about her, we don't know her name at all, was that she was a sinful woman. They judged her motives on why she was doing things, and I have to wonder that though very different of a situation, the responses were very emotional responses. And when she showed up and started wiping Jesus' feet, you could see people making judgments about things that they didn't know. And I wonder what they would have thought, or what they did think. We know some of what they thought, but of Jesus' shocking response to her. Everyone knowing she was a sinner, everyone knowing all the wrong that she had done, all the people that she had crossed, all the things that were in her history of offending and all of that stuff. And yet Jesus' response to her was different than everyone else's. So let's go ahead and read, starting in verse 36. Again, this is a really well-known story in Scripture, and so that's why I really wanted to open with that thought, because it as I started to think about that in a different way, how would I respond to someone that I knew really hurt people if they walked in and started raising their hands or started singing or whatnot? Let's really make this personal, not just another story that we're reading because we're here on Sundays, but let's really see how we can be more like Jesus in the way that we respond to others. So it says one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him. Remember, Jesus has been doing some great things. He's been teaching, miracles have been happening, and we've kind of just been systematically going through and experiencing, or not experiencing, but seeing and reading through all these different wonderful miracles that have been taking place and all these things that Jesus has been doing for so many different people, and he's growing in popularity, and people are following him all over the place now. And so here is a Pharisee, a leader of one of the religious leaders of the day, and he asked Jesus to have dinner with him. And so it says Jesus went to his home, and he sat down to eat. Now, he didn't sit down in a chair like we're used to sitting down with a table and all that kind of stuff. That's not how they did things back in the Middle East at that day. They would all gather together, and they would more like recline, but not in like a lazy boy recliner, okay? It was reclining forward, actually, so their feet were based behind them. They'd really kind of lean on their left elbow, and then they'd eat, or however they did it back then, but they'd eat with their right hand, okay? So they're all at this table, they're eating together and having a good time. And it says, when a certain immoral woman from the city heard that he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. Now, what's interesting about that is that sounds weird to us. I don't know if you've ever had anyone like come while you're having dinner at someone's house and just show up uninvited. It sounds kind of weird to us, but this was actually not what she did, but having people show up to dinner was quite common back in the day, because people that were well-known within the community, leaders within the community, specifically religious leaders, they had plenty of money, and when they would have guests over, they would do it not behind closed doors. They actually, part of their place had this open courtyard that was that sometimes would have a fountain or different things, and when they would have dinner guests over, people from the city or from the outside that weren't necessarily invited to dinner would be able to come and gather around and hear the conversation, so that they could, in essence, kind of gain nuggets of wisdom and hear kind of what was happening. And so it wasn't like she was the only one that was around. And that's how word kind of got out. And so there were other people that were witnessing all this take place. And so she comes up, and with this expensive vial or alabaster bottle of perfume, and it says that she knelt behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. Now, again, I don't know about you, but I'm really uncomfortable if I'm Jesus in this moment, right? It just sounds really weird to me, because first off, I don't want you touching my feet, first off, okay? And then you're crying, you all felt uncomfortable as I was crying just a few minutes ago. Here she is weeping as you're trying to eat. All of this is it's a really awkward situation, right? And so it says that she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. When the Pharisee had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She is a sinner. So now, that's the weird part about this scripture for me, is because I'm if I'm the dude that's eating with Jesus, I'm hey gal, you're really making this awkward. Can you please leave? He's not saying that. He's saying, wow, you got a past. Ooh, you got a present. Ooh, you got some mess going on in your life. What are you doing here? You don't deserve to be here. But he doesn't say that out loud. He's thinking that in his mind. And it says, then Jesus answered his thoughts. Now, it'd be cool to have dinner with Jesus, except for the fact that he could read your thoughts and then call you out on your thoughts, especially if your thoughts were wrong. And so he says, Simon, so now this is where we learn the name of this Pharisee. I have something to say to you. I wonder what's going through his mind. Go ahead, teacher, Simon replied. And so at this point, like depending on which theologian you're reading and about this story, there are all these different theories as to why Simon invited Jesus to his house. Was he genuinely curious about Jesus and wanting to know more, learn more, hear his teaching, or was he trying to trap Jesus? Or, what really was his motive? I really believe if he was trying to trap Jesus in this moment that Luke would have mentioned that, because he does that so often, and as do the rest of the gospel writers. But we don't know Simon's true motives for inviting Jesus over. It could have just been for clout, because Jesus was growing in popularity and all of that. It'd be like having a celebrity come over. It could have been, there could have been a lot of different reasons why. It doesn't really matter why he was coming, otherwise the text would tell us. But he does respond with a respectful title to Jesus. He says, "Go ahead, teacher. Go ahead, rabbi." And then Jesus told him the story. A man loaned money to two people, 500 pieces of silver to one and 50 pieces of silver to the other. But neither of them could repay him, and so he kindly forgave them both, canceling their debts. Who do you suppose loved him more after that? Simon answered, "I suppose," notice the hesitation there. When someone tells you a story, then asks you to respond, and they're asking you in a way that whatever answer you give, you're probably either putting your own foot in your mouth or they're looking for a different angle or something. I have to imagine that's kind of Simon's hesitation here. Like, okay, what angle is he coming at with this? And so he responds to Jesus' question, and he says, "I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt." "That's right," Jesus said, and Simon's chest kind of puffs up. And then he turned to the woman, Jesus meaning Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Look at this woman kneeling here. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she had washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair." And so now what Jesus does is he's going to use three different examples of three customary things that would happen back in the day when you would invite an honored guest into your home. And Simon failed in all three of these categories, and this sinful woman, I feel weird just calling her woman, because that's not even acceptable in our culture today, but that's all we know. We just know we don't have a name for her at all. Some might say, well, she's Mary Magdalene, or, because there's some other stories, and that's not clear either. There very well could have been two, possibly three different instances in which Jesus was anointed with oil. And so it's really, most theologians believe that this is definitely a separate instance from Mary for sure. And so we don't know this woman's name. And so he says, I'll read the part again. "Look, the woman kneeling here, when I entered your home, you didn't offer me anything to wash the dust off my feet, but she washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair." Another interesting thing about this is that for her to enter in and do this, that would have been enough of kind of an embarrassment. It would have been enough of a breaking kind of the code or the rules, the unwritten rules or the law, or maybe written rules or the law. Just her doing something like this, interrupting dinner in this way. But what's also interesting, that the fact that she wiped her tears with Jesus' hair means that she would have let her hair down, which was a big no-no in Jewish culture at the time. Like, the day that you got married, your hair went up and you never let it down in public. It was just what you did. And so for her to let it down and to use this to wash Jesus' feet was another way in which she was breaking the law, really. And so he says, you didn't greet me with a kiss. Here's number 2, right? You didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. Again, that's really awkward for us because it's like, whoa, but that was a part of their culture in that day to greet. Apostle Paul even says it in the New Testament, greet your brothers with a holy kiss, right? So that is not one that we necessarily obey all the time here every Sunday. Thank you, Jesus. So he says, you also neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. I tell you, her sins, and they're many, have been forgiven. And so she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only little love. Then Jesus said to the woman, your sins are forgiven. The men at the table said amongst themselves, who is this man that he goes around forgiving sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So he doesn't even, the other guys that were sitting around the table, he doesn't even acknowledge what they're saying. He is focused on this gal and her heart and where she's at and this scene that she literally just made in front of not only everyone at the table, but also everyone that was observing. And it's so fascinating to me to see the difference between Simon and this woman and their approach to Jesus. Because if there's one thing that they have in common, it's that they have both approached Jesus. Simon approached him and invited him to his home. This gal approaches him and, wipes his feet and cries all over him and stuff like that, right? And so their approaches to Jesus, that is where the similarity stops, though. Because even in their approaches, they were much different in the way that they handled being with Jesus. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to just talk for a few minutes here about the difference between the two approaches and the reasons why Jesus really honored this gal who was not an honorable person and who really had some harsh words for the guy who was respected by everyone. Because this is so important for us to think about in our own lives, because just as a few weeks ago we talked through Jesus teaching about don't judge, take out the plank in your own eye before pointing out the speck in the other person's eye. This is one of those moments in which this is a practical application to that teaching. And Jesus is living this out, and he's trying to show Simon something that it has blinded him within his own heart. And the reason why he's responding the way that he's responding is because there's some stuff inside that he hasn't dealt with. And Jesus loved Simon just as much as he loved this lady, but he had to hit Simon head on with truth so that Simon would hopefully see the error of his ways. So let's get to a couple of differences in the way that these two approached Jesus. First off, we see that Simon's approach to Jesus was masked. He had a mask on. But the woman's approach to Jesus, it was completely unfiltered, right? I mean, she's crying, like not just crying. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But it was completely unfiltered. It was, she busted into this place where they're having a good time. Like everyone's like, what is happening? What's going on? What's going on? And so it was just it was a complete contradiction in the way that these two approached one another. And so Simon's approach, it was masked. Now, let me say this up front. Like, we all wear masks. Okay, let's just be honest about that. We all wear masks. And if we didn't wear masks, then everyone else would see us as just a hot mess all the time, right? We'd just be like, yo, boy, stay away from that person because they are super needy, right? That would be kind of, if you were that obvious about everything that was going on in your life and that upfront about all the things that you were dealing with. Like, we all wear masks, okay? And so that's something that we can just put off the table and know and understand that we're all dealing with those things. But we can become so accustomed to wearing these masks that we begin to live with them and think that they're normal. And sometimes they become so normal in our lives that we think we should be wearing them. We begin to buy into the fact that we have this mask on. And so here's Simon, and he's a well-respected member of society. People want to go to dinner with Simon. They want to be around Simon. They want to hear Simon's teachings. And so he's got this mask on that not only is he well-to-do and important, but he doesn't have as many issues as the gal who's bearing it all in front of Jesus. You see, the thing about masks is we get so used to wearing them, and we know that they're not good for us, but when they become a normal part of our lives, it becomes really easy for us to have a way to excuse them or deny them, I wonder if Simon was sitting here today and I said, hey, Simon, man, you approached Jesus with a mask. Whoa, what are you saying there, Paul? Now, I'm the one that invited Jesus to dinner. And not only did I invite Jesus to dinner, but it was really a risk for me to have him over because my esteemed colleagues, they were kind of looking down on Jesus. And so I was kind of risking my reputation. So I don't know what you're talking about, Paul, saying that I approached him with this mask. See, we've got this way that we can do things in such a fashion where it's kind of halfway so that we don't have to expose our mask or admit our mask. But Jesus knew how. Jesus knew how to expose his mask. And we see that his intentions weren't completely pure because as Jesus is allowing this woman to do what she was doing, what's Simon doing? He's thinking in his mind, if Jesus were really a prophet, he would know her. And so he invites him over under the guise of hospitality, and that might have been part of the reason. But in the moment, there's questioning there. There's ulterior motives. You see, our masks, and so he was wearing this mask, and our masks allow us to hide, to think our thoughts, to not expose the things that we don't want seen. Whether we're hiding those things from ourselves or from others, it doesn't really matter. Masks make us feel like we're in control. But in the sight of Jesus, we're really only fooling ourselves. We're walking around like the emperor who had no clothes on, only fooled by our own pride. And here's the woman, and obviously her approach is much different. It causes a scene. It makes people uncomfortable. But she was authentic. And her authenticity allowed her to do the necessary thing that no one else was willing to do, to treat Jesus with the honor and the respect as a guest that he deserved. So not only was their approach different with being masked and unfiltered, but Simon's approach was with indifference. Whereas the woman's approach, it was, extremely emotional. And no, this point is not a gender joke, okay? I just want that to be known up front. I thought about putting a different word in there, but I think that this word is an important word. Simon's approach was indifferent. You see, he did the right thing, but he didn't do it in the right way. He invited Jesus over, but there was other stuff that was going on. And indifference is something, I don't know about you, but indifference is, I feel like, is one of the most dangerous things in our culture today. We have access to so much all the time that we kind of just, it's easy for us to become indifferent. And so one of my biggest fears in being a Christian who lives in America is that I would become indifferent in my relationship with Christ. Why is that, Paul? Because a couple of things. Indifference is, I believe, the enemy to growth. Think about the greatest times of growth in your life. It's when you were the most desperate. It was when you were, in any area of life, whether it was emotionally, spiritually, physically, there was an urgency there. Like, man, things have to change. I have to grow. Otherwise, man, I don't want to stay where I'm at. But indifference makes us comfortable. Like, you know what? Oh, yeah, I need to do that, but I'll get to that a little bit later. There's no urgency there. And without urgency, there's no growth. I would also say that indifference is the result of a full belly. What I mean by that is just satisfied, right? A full belly. Now, a full belly can happen in a lot of different ways. And so we oftentimes think of, being satisfied as a result of being full of all good things. But indifference can create a full belly from just not getting our needs met. That's really what it comes down to, because when our needs aren't being met, then we search out ways to fill those needs. And our needs become recognized through understanding and knowing our insecurities, brokenness in our lives or in our family. They come from hurt that we've experienced over our lives, and we realize that we have these needs that need to be filled. Now, Simon was full because all the needs that he was caring about in this moment, they were being filled. He didn't have a need for acceptance because everyone wanted to be around him. He didn't have a need for approval because everyone respected him. And his needs were being met by all these different people in all these different ways. He didn't have a need to want to grow because people relied on his knowledge about the scriptures. And so he was full, but not from the things that God wanted to give him. And like I said earlier, we live in a country where it's really easy to get full on just about anything, except for the things that we need the most. So this week at the retreat, on the very first day we get there, and so it was four of us pastors, 3 of us were from Washington, all different types of churches, different denominations, not one of us from the same, well, obviously we're non-denominational, but like different backgrounds and all that stuff. 3 of us from Washington, 1 of us from Oregon. And so we get there and kind of get all our stuff settled in, and so there's 4 of us, and then Mark was kind of the host. He was the guy that led us through the whole thing. And so after we got all settled in, we all kind of gathered together, and Mark kind of gave us a rundown on what the week was going to look like and how it was going to be and all that good stuff. and kind of just opened it up. And from there, like, the first guy started talking, and it was just like, it was on. Like, he just bared his soul to us, which I think Mark was a little shocked by. I don't think he gets that right away, but we were a pretty open group with one another. And so anyways, we all kind of took turns and took a couple of hours just kind of sharing where we were at, what our stories were, and to kind of get to know each other and all that stuff. Well, the guy from Oregon had an interesting thing to say, because he's been at his church for 14 years now. He had planted it 14 years ago. But he was sharing his story with us, and I thought it was fascinating, because he actually opened up talking about his time at his previous church. And he started telling us that before he planted this church in Oregon, he was in California, and he said something like this: "I was at one of the most affluent churches on the West Coast." And I was like, I don't know the guy yet. I don't know who he is. I don't know. I'm like, sure, yeah, okay. You're not going to tell us the church name, but you're okay. You're big time. Okay, good. And so he did end up sharing the name of the church later on. And as soon as he said the name of the church, I was like, oh, that was not an overstatement. Like, he is not joking. That is, wow. He was the youth pastor at that church, you know. And his point in telling us this was that he was sharing this with us because his church was so affluent and had so many resources that they didn't need God to do anything. Anything they wanted to do, they had the resources to make happen in their own power. Whatever they wanted, they had at the drop of a hat. Now, they loved Jesus. Their teaching was good, but there was indifference there because they were full of so many things. And so often we think, if I just had a little more money, if I just had a little more time in my schedule, if I was just a little more healed, or I had this skill or this ability, I could do so much for God, or I could give so much more. But Jesus, I think especially in this story right here, is saying that you don't need any of that. Instead of wishing that you'd been given more, why don't you give me all you have right now? Because this gal, all she had was tears and hair. Right? She didn't have much. But she's the one that, and a vial of perfume, right? That's what she had. You see, where Simon did the right thing the wrong way, she had been doing the wrong things, but realized how to go the right way. And the right way was an approach to Jesus in an unfiltered way that was, yes, emotional, but it allowed him to come across and forgive her of her past, her present, and her future. Where Simon approached Jesus with indifference, her approach was emotional. And her emotions did something for her. It allowed her to see some things in a way that no one else could see them because they were all indifferent in this moment. Her emotions gave her a sensitivity to what was happening in this moment. She wanted to approach Jesus, and she saw Jesus' dirty feet. She saw that he wasn't being treated as he should be. And so she did what she could and she cleaned his feet. There was a sensitivity there. Instead of being enamored by the place that she was in or the audience that Jesus was being had by, like probably everyone else was, there was a sensitivity there to attending to him. And her emotions not only gave her a sensitivity to kind of the details of the ways in which he may have been disrespected and all that stuff, but her emotions also called her to action. Her emotions drove her to not just sit back and evaluate the situation, but instead to take action. I was thinking about this, like the whole idea of being emotional and all that stuff. And I think oftentimes we really respect people that are willing to kind of give their all or bear their all, but we don't actually want to do that ourselves because it can be embarrassing. But when it comes down to it and you realize your need for Jesus, when the masks come down, when the indifference is put aside, you begin to care less and less about what's embarrassing or about what other people think, and instead you care more about being with him, learning from him, understanding from him, and most importantly, being forgiven by him. And forgiveness is one of the most powerful things that we as people can experience. Forgiveness is what changed the heart of this lady. And it should continually be changing our hearts as well. We're going to partake in communion here this morning, and so I'm going to cut my message right here and just say a couple other things in closing. So team, you guys can go ahead and come on up. I was thinking this week as I was just pondering this story and the emotional response of this lady. And I wonder sometimes, especially for those of us that have been in church, a part of church, committed to church for a long time. We know we've been forgiven. We're thankful for our forgiveness. We know what Jesus did for us in dying on the cross. We're thankful for him dying for us on the cross. But how deep does our gratitude go? Because I think the greater the depth of our gratitude, the more emotional we'll be. Because the more we realize how much we need him, how much he's forgiven us for, how much he's done for us. And it can be really easy to sing songs and to praise Jesus and to thank him and to mean it. I don't want to sound like we're all bad people because we've been in church a long time. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to get us to face the fact that sometimes we get so used to expressing our gratitude in a certain way that we can become indifferent, even in admitting how thankful we are. And I realize that we don't all express our emotions the same. So I'm not saying that we've all got to cry, a ton of tears and all that kind of stuff. We express our emotions differently. But whether or not we're super, quote unquote, emotional when our emotions come out or not, for you and the kind of person that you are and the personality that God has given to you, I want to ask you this question. I want to ask you, when was the last time for you that you were really caught up in the emotion of God's forgiveness? That you were overwhelmed. We talk about being overwhelmed with life a lot. That's a bad thing. We don't like that. But what about being overwhelmed with God's love and His forgiveness and the fact that He gave up His life? He was put to death for me, for Paul. He went to the cross, and all the things that I've done wrong in my life, all the things that I've said and thought, and the ways that I've stabbed people in the back, all of that can go to the cross with Him as I, by faith, ask for His forgiveness, and He gives it to me. If you confess your sins, He is faithful, just as we were singing before, and just, and He will forgive you of your sins and cleanse you of all unrighteousness. Whether you're a preacher that's been preaching for 50 years that looks great in front of everyone, or you're Simon the Pharisee, or you're the immoral woman that everyone looked down upon, or you're Barry Lukitis, it doesn't matter. How much we've done, how much people know, none of that matters. What matters is your heart towards Him and your understanding and your willingness to not let life distract you in such a way that you forget the depth of love and what He did for you when He went to the cross. Jesus ended by saying to all the important people sitting at the table there, so everyone in the courtyard would hear, those that have been forgiven little love little. Those that have forgiven much love much. The truth is no matter what our reputation is in everyone else's eyes that's in our world, none of that matters. We all need God's forgiveness. We have all broken, no, not broken, but we have all gone against Him. All of us have hearts that are dark and that are broken. And it's through Christ's death on the cross and His resurrection that we find healing and life. And I feel like so much of our lives are spent trying to convince ourselves of how good a people we are. Are we good? Yeah, we're good because we were created in the image of God, but we've also got sin in our lives, which means that we're broken and, yes, even evil. But Christ takes our brokenness, He takes our sin, He takes all of that to the cross with Him, and that is such a humbling thing. And to be humbled means that we should be emotional about it. It shouldn't just be old hat or something that we're, show up for. It should be something that moves us. And so today, as we go to the communion table, I hope that you're moved. Moved to know that you've got a God that no matter what your circumstances are right now, whether you're in hospice, seeing the last little bit of time left here on this earth, or you've got plenty of time left to experience life in a way of however that's going to play out, that you have a God, or you're going through a rough time or whatever it might be, you've got a God that was not only gave up His life for you, He's willing to walk through whatever it is you're facing with you. we're going to partake in communion here right now. And communion here, churches all over do communion a lot of different ways. So the way we do it here is we have a couple of elements that we're going to pass out, a little cracker and a cup. And if you want to partake, we invite you to partake. No one is told no or anything like that. This is between you and God. This is what we do ask, though. We ask that if you're going to partake, that you have recognized what Jesus did for you on the cross. That your brokenness and your sin, that's what he died for. And that you've confessed that to him, excuse me, and allowed your past, your guilt, all that stuff that so many of us carry to go to the cross and be put to death with him. We call that surrendering our lives to him. And it's not just confessing, but it's saying, okay, God, you created me, you know what's best for me. So instead of living life for myself, I'm going to let you guide my life from now on. I'm going to let you take the lead on this. And I'm going to follow you. My life is not going to be about myself anymore. Instead, it's going to be about following you and what you have for me, because you know what's best, not me. It's an understanding that we can't do this on our own, that we need him. So if you've made that decision, I want to encourage you to partake in this. If you've never made that decision, maybe you'll do that in this moment right now as the song's being played and the elements are being passed out. The second thing that I would ask is that we take some time to confess any sin that's going on in our lives. We ask God to forgive us and cleanse us, wash us clean, so that we can partake together with pure hearts. So the elements are going to be passed out, and